was in World War II in the Southwest Pacific, right at the beginning of the war. I was returned to the States where I had a training unit in P-38s, and subsequent to that, in February 1944, I was sent to Europe and did a tour of 50 missions over Europe. In P-38s, in the Southwest Pacific at the beginning of the war, it was in a P-40 fighter. I was an Army Air Corps P-40 pilot at Hamilton Field when Pearl Harbor occurred. Well, Pearl Harbor occurred on the Sunday, 7th of December. I was visiting in the home of my girlfriend's family in San Francisco, and it came over the radio, and we all came to attention, of course, in her home. And then we all said, well, I better get back to the air base immediately, which was the case. And it was shock, pretty well a case of shock to the populace, to everybody around. You couldn't believe the idiots would attack us. But, yeah, it was quite shocking. We did realize we were in for a long war with Germany threatening too. Germany was actually the bigger threat. Japanese were honored, but they weren't as honored as they thought they were. Well, at Hamilton Field, as a fighter pilot, I had considerable misfortune. I had to bail out of a burning P-40, and then I had a mid-air collision when my unit that I belonged to at Hamilton shipped out to the Philippines. Then I didn't get to go with my unit, and I subsequently was sent with a group of nondescript, various type military personnel as replacement personnel for the war effort in the Southwest Pacific. The Japanese forces had advanced over the Philippines. They had, in other words, they had already conquered the Philippines before the ship. I left the port of San Francisco the 22nd of December 1941, 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor, wound up being unable to reach the Philippines, and my replacement unit, which was in the Philippines, and wound up in the islands of Indonesia, and the Japanese conquered the island I was on, which was, the name of the island was Java, the Java campaign, and the Japanese conquered all those islands, and we escaped to Australia. And from a port in southern Australia, a new fighter group had been sent from the States to Australia to bolster the forces in the Southwest Pacific. And we as stragglers down from the island in Java, I was assigned a flight in this new bomber group, and I flew as a flight leader in this group, the 49th, later termed 49th Fighter Group. And the 49th Fighter Group had more enemy victories than any of the other units in the Air Force. We were assigned this new group, and we were sent north. This group had landed in Australia, and they were at 3 cities, 1 squadron each of the city of Melbourne, Sydney, and Canberra, which is 2,000 or 3,000 miles north of the front. And we were 2 weeks after landing, we were given 2 weeks training for these new bomber pilots, and the situation was so desperate that they had to send these green pilots. And I was still green by that time, though I was more experienced than anybody else in America. So they sent me and some of my friends that made it out of Java back to Darwin to hold the line. We feared the Japanese were going to invade Australia, and to such a degree that we were trained there as ground submachine men to resist the ground effort, which would have been kind of sad because we weren't very experienced ground soldiers. So we had a raid one day. The Japanese raided Darwin for 31 days straight, softening it up for the invasion of Australia by the Japs. And I was leading, my squadron commander was leading a flight of 8 P-40, 2 flights of 4, leading flight of P-40. He was a captain, I was second lieutenant, leading a second flight. We were approaching these bombers, we were intercepting these bombers that had raided the port of Darwin. And I was closer to the bombers inside, my flight leader close to the bombers rowers too. And he said, I said, do you want me to lead the attack, or do you want to lead the attack? And I was relieved when he said, go ahead, because he had no combat experience, and I had a little. So in the ensuing battle, I shot down 3 Japanese Betty bombers. That was their latest big bomber called a Betty. And it entered the war there and carried through. And the signers of the peace treaty, wasn't much of a treaty, it was the conclusion of the war, arrived at the scene in a Betty bomber. But on that occasion, I struck at 2 different, 3 Betty bombers, large formation of 31 enemy bombers. So there were plenty of targets. This formation of Japanese bombers, 31 heavy bombers. When my squadron commander said I could lead the attack, well, I wanted to let them know that we were confident, so I did a slow roll before I did the attack. I don't know how intimidating that was to them. But anyhow, on my attack, I set one of the lead bomber actually on fire. And then I wheeled back into the formation as I passed over the bomber formation. And I wheeled back in and pursued 2 other, one, then the other, and approaching the first bomber that I came upon. I noticed he had a 20 millimeter cannon he was shooting at me in the tail position. And since he was shooting at me, I felt I should return the favor. So I pulled my tracers across the turret in the tail, and he quit shooting. Well, the fighter plane's faster than bombers, so it overtook the bomber. I had to dive underneath to keep from hitting the bomber with my plane. And at that moment, a big gush of oil from one of his engines that I had went over my windshield made it difficult, but I could still see the next bomber coming. Same damn deal. Another gunner in the turret of the next bomber was firing a cannon at me too. But fortunately, their 20 millimeter cannon didn't work very fast. It was kind of poof, 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 like that. My 50s were going like that. I sawed it across that next turret, and he shut up too. So a moment later, one of those first my squadron leader passed over the bomber formation also, and he saw that the lead bomber that I had attacked was on fire. And then a couple of minutes later, my wingman observed one of those bombers that I had fired at. He was going to attack him, but he blew up in front of him. So that was the second confirmed victory. Well, to shorten the story, I bagged 3 Bettys. We claimed to bag 13. It was later determined that we didn't bag only 11. After that mission, the Japanese changed their target from Australia to the Solomon Islands. They decided they'd intercept the Solomons extend to the east, and they would have cut off our path to Australia anyhow, so they decided on invading the Solomons, and they found the U.S. Navy pretty tough nut to crack too, so the war goes from there. In fact, that mission, everything before was defeat. Read of it. In fact, Edward R. Murrow, you ever hear of it? Okay, he used to give a nightly broadcast in Britain about the war. He was right over there in the middle of it. And And he would say, the British have reported that 54 bombers were out tonight, and 7 bombers are missing. And 47 bombers were over the continent tonight bombing. 12 of our aircraft are missing. And that unit in Java where we had no victories then was like the Marianas. You know what the Marianas turkey shoot was? It was the Marianas turkey shoot in reverse. Ours was the turkey shot, and theirs was the turkey shoot. The Jap. But we just quote Edward R. Moore. 7 of our airplanes went out today over the enemy. All of our aircraft are missing. Which was the case.
Yeah.
We lose them all.
Disheartening, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, you know, if you just got 1 or 2.
Yeah, a little morale builder.
Yeah, just 1 or 2. Most of the fighter aces, and I know them practically all, of course, because I'm a member of the organization, association, and we meet annually, and our meeting is in San Antonio, different cities, but almost every fighter ace I know is a former hunter. Maybe you're interested in why. There are 4 important qualifications of a fighter pilot. One of it is to have some knowledge of ballistics. If you can't put a bullet where it needs to go in an air battle, you might as well go home. You're no good. The more you know about how to put a bullet where it needs to go, the better the pilot you are. Number 2, it's a requirement to have the experience of stress and the surge of adrenaline, otherwise known as buck fever. If you experience a serious attack of buck fever, you're disabled. I participated in another book. The title is Top Guns, and I wrote the first chapter of Top Guns. That is the World War II section. There's one chapter before about World War I. And having done that chapter, I stressed how important it is to be able to control buck fever. One of those authors in Top Guns, if you read the book, says, I think I was a half a mile away when I fired at my first enemy. That's buck fever. There is no greater buck fever, no greater surge of adrenaline than comes from looking right at the other enemy, boring in at him 300 miles an hour. So that's 2. Number 3, you have to have some coordination. If you're not as well coordinated as your enemy, you're likely to lose the battle. And fortunately, I don't know what does it, but most of the My friends and acquaintances are modest people and not big shots. At Hamilton Field, I was a second lieutenant. At the end of my career, I was a colonel. I have Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 16 Air Medals for all these missions that I went through before. Came back, mentioned that I reported into the 4th Air Force Headquarters in San Francisco, was sent to Van Nuys, California, to a unit that was training in P-38. Then I became a squadron commander. We were moved north to Olympia, Washington, to face a threat. We feared the Japanese were going to invade northwest United States rather than the south, so they sent me and my squadron of P-38s. Then back to Southern California when the threat receded and we were needed better flying conditions, so we came back to close to Van Nuys there. Then I was sent from there to Italy, 15th Air Force headquarters in Italy. They were conducting the air war in the south of Europe and over the Palesti oil field, which was the #1 target of the Allies. So I did 50 missions there, and then somebody said, yes, I had a proud day on the D-Day, the 6th day of June. One of my victories of ME-109 occurred on D-Day. Actually, it's about as uninteresting a victory. We were flying toward Romania and the oil fields. We had many missions against the targets in Palestine. And let's see, up ahead, I happen to be the leader of the unit, 48 airplanes. And right behind me were 16 of my own squadron's airplanes. And up ahead, I saw 2 little dark dots, and there were Allied airplanes ahead, Allied airplanes behind. These could have easily have been some of our airplanes, but I said I better keep my eye on these since I don't know just who they are. Well, as I approached, I saw they had Black Crosses insignia. So I turned on my gun switch. Here's 15 guys immediately behind me. There's irony in this story. I approached, and as soon as I came within gun range, I shot and got one of them. The other wheeled down and went somewhere. But later after the war, in fact, an author called me one time and he said, I'd like to quote you the book, and can you tell us the story? How many victories do you have? I said, I have 8 victories. And a couple of weeks later, he called me up and says, you big horses out, you don't have 8 victories. And I said, where in the hell did you get that story? He said, from the Air Force record. I said, well, I better start listening, because I said, well, I'll check into that. I didn't know that. So I called him And they said, yeah, you don't have 8 victories. And I said, well, where were they? He said, in the Southwest Pacific. I said, where's the record of the ME-109 in Romania? They said, we don't have any record. A little bit later, they wrote me and said, we've found that we are missing 4 days records from the 4th of June to the 8th of June, and we just don't know. Maybe 2 years after that, I meet the records keeper of the Fighter Aces Association. His name is Frank Olnick. He keeps all the records. I happened to see Frank in a hotel lobby where we were having our reunion. And he said, oh, hi, Jim. He says, saw one of your victories the other day. And I said, going over the records. And I said, where's that? Which one? He said, oh, it's an ME-109. And I said, Italy? He said, yes. Where was it? Records of the 71st Fighter Squadron of the 1st Fighter Group. I said, please send me a copy. I received the copy. I sent it to the records department. They said, oh, since your first letter, we have done some investigating, find that 4 days of Air Force records were lost, period.
Wow.
In Italy. And I said, well, here's my part. I said, we apologize. We'll issue a letter of apology, which they did.
You talked about flying P-40s and P-38s. Of the 2 planes, which one was your favorite to fly?
Well, the P-38 by far. The real honey of all my flying experiences was the F-86. Sabre jet. What a Cadillac that little baby was. I would have gladly fought the Japanese Air Force with I probably should say this since it's sort of a P-51 gathering. I have about 500. I was an instructor pilot in 51 for four different squadrons in 3 different states back after World War II. So I accrued about 500 hours in 51. So, but I will have to say this, that I like the P-38 better. It was a stable sucker. Yeah.
Good gun platform.
Oh, beautiful. And, I missed an airplane one time because my wing guns cross, you know. The bullet path of your wing gun has to cross somewhere. And I fired at this plane, and he was just before my bullets converged. They went that way and straddled him. And he went, whoop, right. And I never got on him again. Totally lost him. I had total confidence. In fact, I was disappointed, quite disappointed one time when we got into a big rat race hassle. And this ME-19 got on my tail. And when he loomed so big that I didn't dare stay any longer, I went straight up in a loop And my wingman came along and shot him down. And I was so damn disappointed that I'd lost my target. I'd been wanting to get one by myself in the P-38. Because I'd conquered all of my P-51. In fact, I asked Bud Anderson one time, I said, Bud, did you feel you could handle a P-38 and a 51? He said, oh yeah, I did. Well, then I had to conclude that it had to do with the pilot, you know, because I never lost it. Never, ever lost a battle with a 51 and a 38 or a P-47.
Did you escort bombers as well?
Totally.
So you were covering those bombers and then...
I say totally. We had a few ground missions, certain special missions. Wow, I hated those low-level missions because you're inches away from your leader, and if you have one little glitch, then you're in a ball of fire because you're 10 feet from the ground, hugging under the radar. That mission to nearly all of the pilots of the Yamamoto mission are close friends of mine. John Mitchell, Rex Barber, the man that shot down Yamamoto. I was his best man to his wedding. And missions like that where they were off the waves, you know, just inches. You have to do it or give away the mission.
It's a real honor to get to meet you, sir. And thank you for your service. It's because of guys like you that I'm able to be here and have the life that I have.
Thank you for your honor.
I appreciate it. To me, the airplanes are fun to look at and great, but to me, this is this is what I enjoy. I enjoy talking to
yeah, it's a different club.